Hello, welcome to our December teacher office hours. Today's topic is building a historical argument. So we're going to take a couple of minutes today to talk about how students can take the research that they've already done. Hopefully they've started that research process for their project and turn that into a project and a historical argument. So I'm going to start with talking about historical thinking skills. A lot of times students will start by just looking for resources, right? Primary and secondary sources about their project. But that next step is asking them to engage with those primary and secondary sources, think about where they came from and how they can be useful for the project that that student is developing. So I just wanted to take a moment to go over some historical thinking skills that it might be helpful to introduce to your students if you haven't already, or to ask them to think about when they're looking through their resources and through their sources that they found. So I'm going to have them listed here. The four big ones that I think all students should consider when they're building their projects is sourcing, number one. So looking at their resources, looking at their primary and secondary sources, who made this source, when was it made, who was it made for, what's that message or argument that they're seeing within that research. Contextualization, when and where was it created, how do the circumstances of that document impact its content, asking students to engage with it in a little bit of a different way, thinking about what it is, and when and where it was created. Corroboration, then taking that time to say, we have our sources. What do other sources say? If I have this source, what does this other one say? Do they agree or disagree? Are there other possible sources that I haven't looked at yet? Hopefully, throughout the research process, students will be able to see that hopefully, one source can lead to another as they continue to find primary and secondary sources. Close reading. What claims does the author make? What language is used within that? So helping students to engage with their resources in this way will hopefully help with the next step, which is building out that historical argument. It's all about asking questions, right? Questions are the most important part of developing a historical argument. So getting students to ask questions of their resources and of their primary and secondary sources is going to help the next step and make it a little bit easier, right? And help that happen. So important to think about as students are collecting resources, they're also engaging with historical thinking skills while they do that. So when I say a historical argument, there's a lot of ways you can present this to your students, right? We can say historical argument. We can say that they need to make a thesis statement, that they have to have a claim. Whatever you want, whatever way you want to present it to your students is, whatever works for you and your students, go for it. But when I'm talking about a historical argument, we're talking about the process of asking those questions that I mentioned, engaging with that primary and secondary source research. From that research, they can then develop that claim or thesis statement. Basically, can they make an argument from what they found, and can they use that research to support that claim or that thesis? So what does the research tell them, and how can they then tell us about it through their project? What I've learned over, multiple years of National History Day in Indiana, and also just working with students and teachers, developing a historical argument takes time. It is not something that's going to happen overnight, and it also will be something that you will come back to again and again. The first draft of a thesis statement is never the final draft of a thesis statement. So developing it over time, right, and using those resources and going back to them, looking at them again. That's why I say practicing the skills in small ways will help students learn the process. They'll be able to consider what those primary and secondary sources tell them, and maybe over time learn the skills in small ways. As you maybe do a class activity with it, they can then look at their own research using the skills that they learned. So start with having students develop research questions. I think that's very helpful as they're looking at their research, to have a question to guide them. If something that they want to learn or they want to know, something that they don't know already that they need to learn from their research, then that can help them build the argument from there. I am going to suggest a resource that I think is probably one of the best resources for students and teachers in particular, who are trying to help students build historical arguments. The Library of Congress and National History Day has a variety of resources to help with building historical arguments, but they specifically have something called the Guide to Student Research and Historical Argumentation. And this is a whole entire guide that the whole purpose is to focus on building a historical argument based on research. So it not only goes through how to find primary and secondary sources, but then also how to build research questions and then build that into an argument, talking about that thesis or that claim. So I think that's a really great place to start, especially if you want additional support in the building of the historical argument portion as students build out that project. So a lot of times when you're having your students develop their projects, it all comes down to that idea of the thesis statement. And the thesis statement is the foundation of a National History Day project. A National History Day project is not an NHD project without a thesis statement. So we want this to be the argument that reflects the main idea. So students are going to build their research, they're going to build their argument and provide evidence, but we should still have some type of statement that provides us the main idea. It's the message that that student wants to get across, and it connects the topic to the theme. I think that's the really big part, is that a lot of times we need to remind students that with the National History Day project in particular, the thesis statement also is meant to help judges who are looking at that project see the connection to the theme, and then judges can then see if that plays out throughout the rest of the project. So this is not more than a few sentences, right? We're keeping this a short statement, but it gives us the significance and tells us what this project is going to be about. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach a thesis statement. A lot of people use the SOS method. I also like to keep it simple and think of it like an equation. For National History Day in particular, I think this is helpful. The thesis for a National History Day project should be the topic, the theme, and the impact. I like to think of it like an equation. So thesis statement is presenting the topic to your reader, making the theme connection, and showing us what the impact of or the significance of this project and of this topic is. Then judges and people who are looking at this project should then see, okay, this is what the thesis statement told me, and this is what the project is about. Does the rest of the project reflect that? And that's how when we look at projects, I think that's a really great way to approach it, and also ask students to make sure that their thesis statement reflects the rest of the research that they've presented. So again, this is just a really quick overview and a couple of reminders about building that historical argument. But when you're doing this with your students, think about the research they've done. Have they considered and analyzed those resources? Have they asked questions or made research questions based on what they need to learn? And then can they then develop that into an argument? Following those steps will help them with that process of creating a National History Day project. So thank you for joining me.